Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Magik of Science with your host, the Gray Mage. Today, we are going to return to actually a topic that came up in episode 1, which is hydropower, or hydrogen or water technologies in general. So I have a few technologies that I want to mention today, but first and foremost, I want to spend a second talking about how magnificent water actually is. It's almost like a conundrum how it works. If you really think about it, H2O. Water, the quickest way to put out fire, is made of two of the most explosive and ignitable elements on the periodic table, which is really interesting. It's called the universal solvent because almost everything in water begins to break down into a granule, liquid form. It has a couple forms that I'm sure you're all familiar with. You can freeze it into a solid, or you can heat it up into a gas, which is pretty cool. Okay, so what about all this? Let's talk about how we are currently using water today to try to solve the ever-growing demands of the electric industry. So for those of you watching or listening in, I'm going to pull up a resource and I'll share that with you in just a second. Okay. So in 1974, the world use of wattage, which on a world scale we measure in what's called a terawatt hour, which is how much energy it would take to create a terawatt in 1 hour. And if you want to know how much a terawatt is, there's a lot of zeros. Look it up. So that was 1974. Today we are approaching 25,000 terawatts per hour. That's a lot of power, and the demand is only going to get more and more extreme as we start to explore electricity as an alternative to things like coal and fossil fuel, and as we expand into new technologies like electric cars. But there might be some solutions in water to kind of help us curb some of the negative side effects of our current electrical demand, things like lithium batteries and cars that are powered by them. So let's start with the hydrogen car. Now, the hydrogen car is a completely water-powered car that spits out essentially steam as a byproduct. Some of them you actually spit out like pure oxygen, because the way that a hydrogen cell works is it separates the hydrogen from the oxygen, and then it uses the hydrogen to ignite basically the same kind of technology that exists in a standard rotary engine, but now we're using hydrogen instead of fuel, creating a byproduct of oxygen. So in theory, these cars would drive around and scrub the air. Now, there are several companies that are already invested in these technologies. I think one that's coming to America pretty soon is coming to us through Hyundai. And there are several countries that have already implemented a lot of hydrogen-powered cars. Korea being one. China is looking at these same technologies. They're also doubling down a lot on hydropower, in the form of buildings similar to the Hoover Dam. So we have the ability to create a fuel out of water, and that could help with the fossil fuel demands. There's also this really powerful technology. There's a lot of problems with international freighting currently, ocean freighting. Right? These big ships burn tons and tons and tons of oil, and although a lot of that goes into the air, a lot of it actually goes into the water. If you look at the statistic of how much damage 1 gallon of water does, or 1 gallon of oil, it can actually contaminate roughly a square mile of ocean water. So these freighters, like that's one of the that in fact is the largest part of the logistic industry on an international level, is these big freight ships that are out there. And so like we are dumping tons and tons and tons of oil burn off into our oceans. And there might be a technology that would allow us to create a emission-free, no moving parts, fully electric engine that's actually powered by the ocean itself. So this technology is called magnetohydrodynamic thrust. Now it sounds really complicated. Stick with me, I'm going to break it down. So salt itself is actually semiconductive. And in a magnetic field, especially one that's suspended, like say in water, these particles would be able to move. And so if you had opposite polarity, if you had a north-sided or a north-facing polarity on the left and a south-facing polarity on the right, and they were running parallel to each other, the fields would be circling in opposite directions, and when the water met in the middle, it would create a jet stream. Now, this is a extremely viable solution, I think, for some of the current issues in the logistic industry. Not only would this create an emissions-free situation, but think of how much surface area a ocean freighter has and how easy it would be to subsidize most of the power for these things through solar. It would be a completely self-sustained system, and it would be 100% green. Speaking of ocean power, moving on to the next kind of alternative situation I wanted to talk about today. They are actually figuring out how to harness the waves themselves. So as the tides come in and out, and as all of the kinetic energy that is built up in the ocean forms into crests, especially towards the shore, they have created essentially a kinetic wave capturing device that floats on top of the water and uses the force of buoyancy to create an up and down piston-like motion that can capture kinetic energy and turn it into electric energy. Now they are sampling these all over the place. What's up, Joshua?
Hey.
How you doing, man? Thanks for hopping in. So I'm currently on wave power technology. I'm going to finish my spiel real quick and then, yeah, I'm going to open it up and see if anyone has anything to say about hydro technology and power. So they're using these electropistons in the ocean, and there's also a couple designs on current technology. I don't mean like modern, I mean as in underwater currents, things like the ECU, trying to use that kind of continual energy to produce electricity. Now there is another side to that particular argument, and that is that if you were to connect or collect the energy out of especially the ECU, technically you would be slowing down that current over time, and we don't know how those currents got there, and in fact that's already one of the problems we're facing as our ocean gets warmer and more acidic, is that the underwater currents are slowing down, and if they were to stop, there would be irreparable damage to the underwater environments. So that technology, thank goodness, is currently on the back burners because it needs a little bit more R&D, and that seems to be the way that humanity is approaching that, which is good. That's a very we should be cautious there, right? Like that's a mistake that once made can't be undone. So that's all I have for alternative water technologies, but I do want to talk about just some fun technologies in general. So if you haven't heard, I think they're called an ECG machine. If you haven't heard of a water cutter, check it out. That's what we have turned water into a saw blade that is so accurate that we actually use it mostly to cut diamonds and things that are extremely hard. They do it with extreme precision, and because it's a cooling, semi-frictionless environment. I mean, technically it is a friction science, but it's a water-based friction science, so the heat is very transmittable. You can get extremely accurate cuts with these things. These are what we use to create laser, gem shapes, extremely exacting cuts on stones. And then there's some fun stuff in the world of jetpacks. There is the hydro jetpack. I believe at this point the hydro jetpack has evolved to a competitive regional or even national competitive development state. There are some that are highly functional. I've seen people going across big bodies of water, which is hilarious and pretty awesome. And let's see. Oh, this one is really cool because it's extremely simple mechanics, and was done mostly with PVC pipe, actually. So in the Andes Mountains, there was an experimental hydro harvester. A hydro harvester is something that is able to collect condensation out of the air. And there are many, many versions of this, but the one that I'm talking about in particular was for high yield hydro harvesting. So it was kind of a very big mesh looking structure. And this structure would collect a bunch of raindrops and dewdrops. And so over the course of a day, they could collect roughly 28 gallons, which is a pretty good amount. It's enough to, with a few of these, you could, in theory, hydrate an entire farm and village situation. Now, what's even cooler about this thing, though, is that the same organization, they created, when they were building this, they created a pipeline because they had this idea that if they were able to create, say, a glacier or some sort of water landmass in the winter, that it could possibly create, an environmental change in the summer, and they're correct. And so what they did is they built this pyramid structure essentially out of PVC pipe, and they ran water from up a mountain during the winter when it got cold enough to freeze. And so the water, because it's fluid motion, it didn't freeze all the way in the pipes, but it would come out of the pipes and holes that they drilled, and that eventually formed a pretty big ice mass, like a mini glacier. Then when summer came around, that glacier began to melt, but it also created humidity, and so it created rain in this pocket, a little pocket environment up in the mountains. It was a highly effective way to provide life-giving resource to an otherwise kind of hard to reach area of the world. They're using a similar technology in the Middle East, places that are extremely arid and water is a scarce resource. They've actually created a temperature-based hydro harvester where essentially you can burn trash, which I know isn't great for the air, but you can burn trash to pull water right out of the air, even in a very, very arid desert area. And so this is almost like a two birds, one stone in certain areas, because it helps with both the hydrating efforts and it also helps with some of the cleanup efforts. Very interesting technologies. So I think that's it for me today. Oh, hey, how's it going, Uday? I'm gonna invite you to speak. How you doing? I was actually about to kind of close up, but you hopped in here for a second, so I want to check in.
Tell me, how are you?
I'm doing great. Just kind of spent some time doing a conversation about alternative water-powered technologies as well as energy-providing technologies. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you want to know about water technologies?
Yes, I'd love to hear what you have to say about water technologies.
So, Gray, right? Gray. Franklin. What should I call you?
You can call me Franklin, or you can call me the Gray Mage. Your choice.
Okay, Franklin. So I would say I would not have that much, experience on the water thing since I don't have that exposure with the water technology and the hydro technology. But yes, I may throw some light on some food or sustainability or packaging related activities. But yes, water do play a lot of key things in producing a lot of energies by some hydro projects, hydro all these things. What I know. So basically, I don't have much knowledge about water thing, but yes, I may throw light on the topics of safety.
Well, excellent. I'd love to trade some wisdom with you. I have a couple things that I could definitely share that are pretty exciting in the field of water-powered technology and alternative energy. But I'd love to hear what you have to say. So please take the floor.
So basically, I'm a food scientist by profession. I am also looking for packaging sustainability options right now. So using two-layer packaging into a single monolayer, or just to opt into some sustainable technologies. We are moving ahead from 3 layers to 2 layers, from 2 layers to a single monolayers. For example, let's say if we use PET poly structure, we are moving ahead to poly structures from the from multi-layer structures to a monolayer structures. For example, if we'll say we are using a PET poly structure for a packaging of let's say flour, or let's say some grain or something like that, we'll use single layer structure, PET poly structure. So that will save some sustainability thing, like that will save some time in recycling that multi-layer structure, eliminating those 2 layers from a single multi-layer and then recycling it. We'll just have to recycle that single layer, and we are done. So that is something called sustainability. We are going ahead with a lot of sustainability projects, like as moving all the sort of laminate plastic, multi-layer laminates into single layer or double layer structures, moving all PET bottles into a similar structure. Let's say we are having CSD, carbonated soft drinks, into two packaging materials, like as we are using PET, polyethylene terephthalate, for the bottle production, and PP for the caps, and PET for the labels. So what we will do is we will try and use the similar sort of materials so that it will be easy to recycle. So recycling includes segregation. That will help us stop this segregation process and help us save some time and energy. So that is what I do. Plus I also innovate new sort of food products, developing their recipes, try and evaluate their these nutraceutical values. This is what I do, Mr. Franklin.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for your share. That's some
Thank
powerful
you.
stuff. And definitely, I mean, I 100% agree that a part of the alternative solution problem is going to be material. And we definitely have to come up with some solutions there if we're gonna, if we're gonna be good stewards of our planet. So since you shared with me a technology, there's one that's really exciting that I'd like to share with you if you're open to hearing.
Please go ahead.
Excellent. So there is a technology known as magnetohydrodynamic thrust it's been around actually for a while. I believe it kind of originated in the early 2000s. But essentially, because salt is conductive, if you create a magnetic field in salt water, the water will circulate. And so if you have a north charged node and a south charged node, then the water will circulate in opposite directions. And if they overlap, where they meet in the middle, it'll create a jet stream and it'll create propulsion. And so all you need to create this is electromagnets and a big battery to charge the whole thing. It would be a no moving parts, fully electric engine that would allow any vessel in the ocean to switch off of fossil fuel and onto an electric alternative mode of propulsion. Simultaneously, I think because most likely this technology would end up on something like an ocean freighter, what we use to move everything around, there would be so much surface area on these big ships that probably, with a little bit of help from solar powers, this thing could power itself, and it would be a completely autonomous green energy boat, essentially.
Oh, very interesting, man. Is it practical?
It is very practical. At this point, they've created like 20. Let me see. I've got something pulled up from the internet right here. The first model was actually built in the 90s, and at this point, they have several vessels and several models and designs on this type of technology. But the most common and the best right now is called a magnetoplasma dynamic thruster, where instead of having a left and right beam positively charged, they have a cylinder that is charged with positive and negative on like a left and right. But then there's a tube in the middle, and so the water actually spirals and comes and gets sucked into this tube and pushed out the other side with a lot more force. And so they've created like a no moving parts turbine engine. All right. Well, I think for real this time, that's going to be it for me today. Thank you everyone who tuned in online. I really appreciate the support, and thank you everyone online who's listening right now. Oh, hang on a sec. It looks like I got another speaker. Welcome on in, Jackie. How you doing? It looks like you've got your mic off.
Okay, got it on.
Excellent.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have a question about your they're the Magneto. Can you repeat the name of them?
I just clicked out of the tab, but it was like hydro. So it's hydroelectric propulsion.
Okay, so I have a question about hydroelectric propulsion as someone who is like concerned about conservation. So one of the things I worry about when we're looking at all these hydro energies is noise pollution and impact on the environment. So obviously there is nothing that's perfect, nothing that's going to impact the world around it. But one of the things I think about when I think about the issue of boats in the ocean, besides just, gas use and oil, is also noise pollution. And we found that has been very damaging to wildlife. So I was wondering if you knew anything about how much noise these engines create compared to, say, our normal, like what we've been using as of now engines.
That is a fantastic question. And actually, I made one of these when I was in the 5th grade. I called it the meat tray experiment back in that day. And I used quarters and a 9-volt battery and alligator wire to like make this thing work in a tub of salt water that I had like just poured, like iodized salt into and mixed up. It's completely silent, actually, 100% silent. And so you don't have any churning parts. There's nothing there's no motion. It's actually the water itself that's moving and creates the propulsion. Now, I'm not sure, however, so if there are, and I might lean into your profession because I know that you are an expert in the animal world, there are a lot of electric field. So there's the electric field that's conducted, and it's very large and it's very powerful. And so this field might mess with an animal if it's using, say, like the electromagnetic field of the Earth to try to navigate or something like that. So do you think there might be some concerns around electromagnetic fields and how that might affect the local ocean biome?
I think possibly. I think that one of the things that would determine that is how large it is and how powerful it is. The only animal that I am super familiar with in the ocean that utilizes it quite heavily that we know of is sea turtles, and it's been found that if you mess with basically the magnetism where they are in their nest, that when they hatch, they won't be able to appropriately find their way around the ocean and navigate the currents. That said, though, if it's only a small local range and it's not consistently bothering them, I mean, I believe that you could probably disorient them if they get close enough to the ship, but hopefully it's not so big that it could potentially throw off an entire population. But I don't know, I think they'd have to like study that and like see how big it is, and like basically it's like area of effect.
As a conservationist, do you think that this would be a wise endeavor for humanity to try to undertake?
I think we always need to be looking for new solutions. I believe very heavily in the precautionary principle, which means before we throw new technologies out there, we should research them and try to understand best we can what negative impacts we will be expecting. But at the same time, if it's going to reduce the amount of noise pollution, chemical pollution, etc., that we're going to have in our ocean, yeah, I definitely think it's something that's worthwhile looking into, and it's definitely worthy of research, particularly as we think more and more of feasible ways to keep our economy afloat and functional as we consider moving away from fossil fuel use. I think it could be actually very important. Like I said, I'm a fan of the precautionary principle, but I definitely think it's a worthwhile venture.
Thank you for your share. Appreciate your contribution. Hey Joshua, how you doing? Welcome back. Cut out there for a sec. Were there any...
Hey, yeah, what's up?
Not much, man. Thanks for joining us.
Sorry, my hands were taken up. I had to try to find my phone to turn it off mute.
No problem.
So, yeah, this is an interesting conversation. You told me about that science experiment before, and I just wanted to catch up and see, like, what exactly is the topic?
So today we're doing a deep dive into hydropower and alternative / water-powered technologies. So far, we've covered hydrogen cars, hydroelectric propulsion, which is what we were just talking about, wave current power, and then I kind of was just talking about some other water projects around the idea of water scarcity in certain areas and how people are kind of leveraging physics using really simple machines to bring water to otherwise arid areas of the world.
Okay. Nice. That's next?
That is what I actually already brought up, but now we got people in the chat, so I might just go back over it. Let me ask you, which one seems most interesting? Which would you like to learn about?
I think that the alternative fuel sources is very interesting.
All right. So let's talk a little bit then about fuel cells. So for those of you online, I've pulled up kind of a schematic of the current hydrogen fuel cell vehicle and all of the main systems that are associated with that. Inside of an electric, it's technically an electric car, but a hydrogen-powered electric car is what is called a fuel cell stack. Right? And right here on afdc.energy.gov, a fuel cell stack is defined as an assembly of individual membrane electrodes that use hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity. Now that's a very vague statement, and there's a few models on fuel cells, but the way that they do this is by separating the water into its two explosive components of hydrogen and oxygen, and then the hydrogen gets turned into a, very similar to how the piston engine works, an explosive driving force that kinetically produces electricity. And the byproduct, which is really interesting, is oxygen.
Oh, that is interesting. It's like you're creating a literal plant out of a machine.
Right. It would kind of scrub the air a little bit as you drove. It wouldn't necessarily scrub, but it would definitely combat CO2 production with O2 production, or just O.
Sounds like they're gonna need that on Mars.
Right. That would be yeah. That's a great point. And if there's already ice on Mars, which there's photos of ice on Mars, there's hydrogen, there's water there. We could create hydrogen powered technology to create an ozone on that planet.
So I've heard before that this technology is readily custom, like it's pretty much can be made very simply. Is that true?
I mean, simply, I'm not sure. I haven't looked into the mechanics of it, but because you have to create a membrane of electrodes, I actually don't know if simple, like if you're making it from scratch, I would imagine that's extremely hard. I might be underestimating how easy it is to get this quote unquote membrane of electrodes. But I don't imagine it would be extremely easy to perform, cellular autopsy.
Right, interesting.
I could be wrong. I 100% could be wrong. It's cool though that this car would have 2 tanks and a battery. So it's technically, it is still fuel powered. So what would happen is it has tank 1, which passes through this membrane, and then hydrogen goes into tank 2 and oxygen goes out the exhaust. And from tank 2, that creates an explosion, and that fuel fuels the piston to turn, and that drives the charging of the battery, which powers the car. There's a couple companies that are actually they're ready to deploy. They're ready to deploy some hydrogen technologies. Looks like, so I've got like Nissan, for example. They have actually 3 models of a hydrogen car coming to a future near you. And they say that, let's see here, they have this quote about like emissions by 2030. I haven't vetted it, but I'm just going to read it live and hope that they're not full of BS. Let's see here. Fossil fuel to achieve zero operations emission by 2030. We are proud to support the decarbonization of WA's transport sector by providing the choice to fill tanks with a zero-emission fuel source. So I think they're also dedicated to creating quote-unquote gas stations, if you will, which Australia has actually already began building their hydrogen gas infrastructure, similar to how America already has some electric car infrastructure. It's coming. It is coming. This, and the implications of having a hydrogen engine, I think, go well beyond just cars. I could see the combination of several of these water technologies. Like if we got really efficient with, say, hydro harvesting, which is pulling moisture out of the air, and we combine that with a hydrogen engine, kind of similar to a jet engine, I would imagine we could create jets that could possibly power planes, and as they flew through clouds, they would fuel up. We could deploy this on trains for sure. The electric magnetic technology could also be deployed on trains. We could have trains that basically run in saltwater reservoirs and are powered by electromagnets. Completely green energy.
It's going to take billions of dollars.
if dollars continue to exist forever, and yeah, you're right, it would take lots and lots of money. But even that has an alternative these days. I feel like that might be a topic for another conversation. I know you want to jump in. Joshua, I'll go ahead and let you put in your plug. But I don't want to get into like cryptocurrency just yet. I think that's a topic coming up.
Oh, I was just going to say that I would really like to see this technology sooner rather than later. So, like, that to me, yeah, like hopefully it wouldn't cost that much to be able to do it on a more personal or smaller level, but to do it in a national level or something like that, obviously, or state level would take obviously billions of dollars. But yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of shifting because I mean, there's a lot of people with a lot of billions of dollars,
True.
Now more than ever, and what dollars is also replaced for whatever X currency, right? It's
right.
Not necessarily
Equity.
Dollars. So yeah, equity to put into those directions, but it's also worth noting that there's probably a chance that there's efforts to resist that type of change, and probably violent efforts also, because we've seen that in history.
That's very true. Yeah, there was the propane car. I think we brought this up on this channel before, but the guy who invented the American propane vehicle was murdered, and his killer was like guilty for corporate espionage manslaughter, and he served his time, and now he's like over it. But I think that this particular issue has already kind of crested the precipice in the sense that if any one organization wanted to stop hydrogen power, they would have to start, like they would have the government of Korea, they would have the company of Hyundai. America's already made, I think they've already made a couple laws around it. So at this point, like there's the American government. Like there are organizations that are very large and powerful that are getting on the bandwagon.
Besides like corporate greed and like financial limitations, what other growing pains would you expect with a transition to this kind of fuel source? Like with the electric cars, we've seen some issues where there's been a hard time finding the correct kind of charging stations across the nation. What do you think you would see with the hydro cars?
Excellent question. Well, I think that the fueling, if the technology develops to a point, would be extremely simple. You could bring gallons of water or just pick some water up at your local gas station or water station at this point. I think that the research and development portion, as Joshua was pretty much alluding to, is going to be extremely hard to convince enough people to put enough momentum behind to get the technology to the point where it is actually consumable and convenient on an individual level. And all of that R&D is also going to have to create a decade's worth of overpriced products that the rich get to access to first, and then the hand-me-downs kind of trickle to us as the cars lose value over mileage and it's more accessible and the technology gets cheaper. So I think that patience, that's going to be a trial, is just knowing that the technology, it already exists today. They have factories for this stuff. Nissan does, at least, and I'm sure there's several others. It's just frustrating to have to be subjugated to the slowness of international economy and money.
What about regions that are water scarce?
Great question as well. So this, I would start to lean into some of the other technologies that were brought up today. There are several methods to bring water to a otherwise arid area. There's a very common and classic well. All right, everywhere's got a water table. Now, practically, after 500 feet, a well becomes extremely expensive and a hard endeavor, and so it's not always an option. So if water well is not an option, then check your altitude. If you're high enough up, then the water it gets very easy to collect out of the atmosphere itself because there's like a constant motion of it. And it's very easy to create a temperature difference on something like a sheet of plastic to collect a lot of water. As I mentioned much earlier in the show, you can get up to, some of the designs, you can get up to 28 gallons a day by harvesting moisture out of the air into like a bucket. Then there's water redistribution. So if you aren't in the mountains, but you are kind of close to, you can obviously get some water piped to you through a river or damming methods. And if that's too expensive or out of the way, there is a process that I don't know where it went or why we stopped developing, but it's still out there called deionization, where we can remove everything from water up to the point, like we can convert salt water into drinkable water. And so the fact that 70% of all the human beings on this planet live on the coasts, that would cover a vast majority of mankind. Does that kind of answer your question? Do you have any others?
No, I think it does. I think it'll be interesting because I could see, like if we could lean into that technology to make water more easily accessible in water scarce places, like we could probably fix a lot of other like social political problems. So it's interesting the idea of leaning into those technologies as well. And I'm pretty sure deionizing water is still a thing because it needs to be used in certain kinds of equipment.
Totally.
I think the other issue to be aware of.
Nope, you cut there for a sec. Give him a second. It's poor connection.
Well,
Hey, you're cutting in and out there, Joshua.
Nutrients out of the body. Sorry. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, that's better.
Oh, I just wanted to note that I'm pretty sure it's unhealthy, not good for you to drink distilled water. It needs to be remineralized, from what I understand.
There are actually a couple arguments in that arena, and I'm glad you brought this arena up. What is healthy water? Right? Like, that's a water technology. Well, some people argue that tap water in your local region is the healthiest water for a few reasons. Now, I understand that there's possibility of like fluoride and stuff, but what they haven't done to this water, because they cannot if the water is acidic and it's moving through metal pipes, over time that will ruin the complex. That will ruin all of the piping, and so the system will break down. So in order to pipe water, they have to de-acidic or de-acify the water. They have to remove all of the acidic nature of water. Where they don't do that is in bottled water, is in sports drinks, is in soda. That water, it's the water itself that brings a lot of the acid to these kinds of drinks. Now, of course, certain sodas and stuff, they go ahead and kick it up a notch by bringing their own acid to the party. But in general, like everything that you have access to as far as water is concerned is acidic except for your tap. And some people think that that's extremely important because that water is fairly neutral. And there is some, like, obviously the reason local is an idea that's important in this conversation is because if you're not familiar on a flora fauna level in your gut with the minerals and all that stuff, the nature of the water, the tap water, you're probably going to have an explosive experience.
So my understanding is that distilled water is okay to drink, but it tastes not good. But like truly fully deionized water is actually dangerous to drink because it can cause essentially water toxicosis if you drink enough. But I think that'd be pretty hard to do.
Interesting.
Water toxicosis meaning basically it's so pure of H2O that it like destroys your salt balance.
That makes sense, I guess. That's an interesting point.
This is why the Kangen water is alkaline. It has something to do with this, I believe, as well, because of that. I mean, if your water is too pure, that the water is actually going to act as an absorption mechanism to take minerals and nutrients out of the body rather than add to it.
Yeah.
Something like that, right, Jack?
Yeah, basically. And so I think for like technology, it has a lot of really good resources, but like health, you have to be careful with how deionized your water is. But I think it would be hard for us to drink. I don't think it would taste good to us, and so I think it would be hard for us to drink enough to actually cause a problem.
Yeah, that's so interesting how, like, chemically something that is so life-giving can, in a way, be toxic in its utmost purity.
Very interesting. I'm looking up a little bit on deionized water just to see what the internet has to say. So bear with me.
I also think there's degrees to which you deionize water. I think that you can like lower the ionization, and that's a little bit more ideal for certain scenarios versus like purely deionized water. And I think that would probably be key and very important.
So there's definitely a huge difference between deionized and distilled water, which is distilled water is purifying through collecting vapor as it cools so that all the impurities are left behind. That's like the oldest human method for purifying water, I'm pretty sure. I'm not seeing what I want, but I do want to mention. So if all of this stuff, if you're listening in the fifth dimension right now from the future, and this stuff is scaring the crap out of you, it's not that big a deal. If you really are nervous about it, you can go down to your local pool supply company and you can get like a pH color powder, and you can throw that in like your tap water. You can put it in your favorite bottled water. You can run some tests and get some data. Pretty much across the board, no matter what side of the argument you're on about ionized being good or bad for you and what level and this, that, and the other, almost everyone can agree that neutral water is not bad for you. And that's kind of what's coming out of your tap. And so like if you throw the powder in your water and it doesn't change color at all, you're safe and you're 100% okay. Yeah, just throwing that little fun one in there. Since we're talking about water and water technologies and stuff, I gotta throw out one of my favorites. Have you ever slept on a water bed?
Been a long time.
I mean, it probably is one of those things where you look at your childhood and you're like, wow, that was awesome. And if I did it now, my old man body would be like, dude, you're an ass. But I loved it personally. What was your opinion of your experience with the waterbed?
Dude, it's been so long. I actually was like a little kid, and I haven't seen those in a long time. It's interesting. They're actually not allowed at my apartment. It was in the writing.
Probably for good reason. I'm sure they've had a learning experience.
Right. Talk about wet dreams. It's crazy. That kind of thing could happen. It could like drown you or something. But I don't think it doesn't. There's two arguments. One, it could be good for the back for the same reason a hammock is, because it creates a natural curvature in the spine, lengthening the spine.
Right.
However, if you're sleeping really awkwardly, it could cause spinal damage, which is probably why they're not so common these days.
Gotcha. So you got to sleep like Dracula to capitalize on the waterbed.
Yeah, same as a hammock, because that's essentially what's happening with the weight distribution.
Makes sense.
I don't think I've ever seen a waterbed.
What? Oh man. Well, yeah, you one of these vacations, you should. Yeah, we'll have to fix that problem. There's something else that since we're on the topic of water, I really want to bring in some of the metaphysical parts of water into this conversation. Starting with science, actually, in the theme of the magic of science. there was a Japanese professor, and maybe one of you guys can help me after I'm done remember his name, if you know what I'm talking about. But
Miyamoto.
The water experiment, you know what I'm talking about?
I think it's the guy. Yeah, I think that's his name.
Okay.
I could be wrong with the name, but
So this gentleman Miyamoto, he conducted experiments on water where he energetically influenced the water with words. He did this by taping, explicit kind of mean words on one ice tray, things like "you're worthless," stuff like that, and then on the other ice tray, he taped words like "I love you," "you're safe," and then he froze them. And what he found is that the ones that were kind of insulted or experiencing a lower, you could call it vibrational or a lower energy experience, froze in such a manner that all of on a molecular level, it was super jagged and kind of like ugly and it had a lot of space in it. So structurally, it was easy to squash. It was a soft ice and you couldn't see through it. It looked kind of dirty because it was like solid white. And then the other ice, the one that was experiencing the higher vibrational love kind of frequency during its freezing experience, it would be crystal clear, which would make, and on a cellular level, it made beautiful snowflakes, and they filled the space very well, creating a very strong ice structure. Very interesting experiment. I think, go ahead,
you
please.
just talked about that in detail that I was not aware of, because I've seen some things about that, but the fact that there was like that level of detail and outcome is kind of mind-blowing and totally metaphysical.
I'm actually very obsessed with this experiment, partially because I don't fully understand the mechanism behind it, and I've been meaning to look into it more, but it makes me feel very justified in things that, like, we're supposed to talk to plants positively to optimize their growth and stuff like that. So I love this experiment. I think it's super cool.
Yeah, it's very profound. I mean, it's something that definitely shifted my perspective in a big way, too, about the nature of my thoughts.
I think the implications of it are pretty massive when you consider how much water there is in a human being's body.
Yeah, I love the idea that if we fill ourselves with negative thoughts, that we are literally changing ourselves on a chemical level, not just like how our neurons are talking to each other, but maybe even on a deeper level than we've even previously appreciated.
Yeah, and there's a lot of solid science around that coming out of the world of psilocybin and like mushroom studies. Okay, so I found the Wikipedia. I hate using Wikipedia because everyone's like, ugh, but we're just going to start there. So you were correct, Joshua. I'm probably going to butcher this, but it was Masaru Emoto. Emoto, and he did this experiment in 1986 and then received like exclusive rights, I guess, to like the technologies and whatnot in 1989. He had several theories about consciousness, and so like he actually was a businessman, which is very interesting, and an author, but he had several theories about consciousness, and this was his most successful experiment in trying to prove the connection between intention and reality. It's very, very, like it's almost obvious when you think about it, right? Like employing emotional energy to water, that like aligns with almost every version of magic or stargazing, or like it's just very well entwined with the occult and beliefs and spirituality in general. And so I find it almost like a duh that if you did an emotional experiment on water, you're going to see fantastical results.
Yeah, it just so happens that water represents our emotions in a metaphysical sense, elemental.
Mm-hmm. baths at like different temperature baths are so emotionally aligning. If you want to relax, take a hot steep, like a tea bag, just steep yourself in like a hot tub or whatever. But if you want to be alert and focused, jump into a frigid cold water. And there's no moment that is quicker to that I am here now and I'm alive than ice cold water.
I found that quite ironic because we put dead bodies on ice. So whenever I realized, I was like, yo, I don't know if this is healthy, because it was like paramedics coming for like old people whenever they were doing that 22 minutes ice challenge. I was like, wait a second, you're putting these old people on ice a little bit too early. And I realized, I'm like, yo, it is actually like death, because I mean, if we're dead, then our bodies are cold. So like to be in an ice bath, it's like, it's definitely ego death or whatever, ego killing, I think.
Yeah. If you think about it on a like cellular physics level, it is actually approaching cellular death, which is like, I think is the most dead organic matter can be. Is all motion has stopped, every system is shut down. And so when you enter ice, your body, in an attempt to make sure you don't die, it retracts a lot of its functions into its core systems. So that's why you'll lose your arms and your legs first, and they'll go numb. You can't feel them because it's actually cycling blood a little bit differently. And as all of this is happening, your heart rate will slow down, which means that you can breathe slower. And all of this slowing it's actually approaching like a stasis. There's certain creatures that can go all the way. If you haven't heard of a water bear, we're not going to dive deep into it, but I highly recommend you check out the water bear. It has this thing called stasis that we cannot explain, where it can survive space. We've dug them out of volcanic material. We found them in ancient Antarctic glacier poles. Like, these things are everywhere, and they can enter this indestructible mode where they just don't die and they don't move cellularly.
There's also frogs that are able to withstand complete freezing. I don't know how water bears. Also, water bears, the other name for them is tardigrades. If anybody's trying to look them up. I don't know what their mechanism is, but I know the frogs, what they have is they have almost this antifreeze compound, which I wish I remember the name of it. But what it does is it prevents crystals from forming in like ice structure. So basically it dilutes the water enough so that it can't form that crystalline structure, because what that does is it prevents the ice from literally spearing through the cells and creating a forced lysis or cell death, which I think is really fascinating.
Interesting. So I pulled up an article from the Los Angeles Times about the Alaskan wood frogs freezing for several months. So what it says here, apparently they can't freeze all the way, but they can freeze up to 2/3 of their water body mass without dying. At this point, though, if they were to bend or move, then they would suffer extreme frostbite, which would like break them, which is very interesting. But because they are basically like 66% cellularly dead in a frozen state of very slow motion, that they don't need to eat during this time, and their energy output is reduced to a level where they can be frozen for several months, which is pretty cool.
I would like to introduce another watery topic.
Okay.
Particularly in the frozen water topic of cryogenics.
Oh.
Which actually, that may not be water or anything, but Jackie, what you're talking about, that's, I believe, the main problem that they're running into right off the bat with cryogenic freezing is that, it has to happen so fast that it has to be like flash frozen because of that reason, because of the spikes of the ice crystals causing massive cell damage and things like that. So it seems that I can't. You might have to look this up because I'm not.
It's both ends, actually, and that's why they theorize it'll never be possible in human body, because not only do you have to flash freeze a human being, but you have to flash unfreeze that same human, and the temperatures that it would take to thaw a human body would also disintegrate it.
My also understanding is I like look at things like these frogs and try to understand like ways that they change their like basically the diluent in their body, the solvent in their body to make it like freeze resistant. But as far as I know, everything that exists that could potentially do that is extremely toxic to human beings. So I think that's like the other issue as well.
Biohacking might be the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly believe that we have barely even reached the tip of the iceberg when it comes to scratch the surface when it comes to like biohacking and genomics.
Oh yeah, we have.
Topic, so.
We don't even have laws on it yet. It's so new, and like that's part of the problem, in my opinion.
But apparently, the Kangen water, the high alkalinity alkalized water, is something that helps the body heal immensely. And the reason they found that out was due to the reason that they invented the thing to begin with was because of the water, the water quality that they found in blue zones around the world. They found that the water, natural occurring water, there is high alkaline water, and that's why that whole thing came to be from the very beginning. It was due to the blue zones, which is the blue zones are places in the planet where there's a extremely unusual high amount of long living people that are centennials. And so
yeah, I've heard this theory. Yeah, it's cellular absorption is what science is trying to explain this phenomenon with. That highly alkaline water, because it is kind of sans electrons, its tendency is to fuse or to be absorbed by, and so therefore like it can be very hydrating and immediately hydrating on like a cellular level.
Yeah, that's what they're saying on the anecdotal responses, is that the hydration level happens really fast, and that a lot of people feel like they've went their whole life chronically dehydrated when they compare their life on that. By the way, I'm not a Kangen water representative, but I might in the future.
Also, if you're sorry, go ahead, Jackie. You wanted to jump in.
Say, how alkaline is alkaline, and also have they controlled in any of these studies for just better access to healthier, more bioavailable minerals that like increase immune function?
That's cool.
Food for thought. Just curious.
Oh, right, and that's interesting because that's part of the, I guess, the ongoing debate between whether or not the store-bought alkaline water, which is alkalized with minerals, versus the alkalized water that is mineralized through, or it's alkalized through electricity. That's kind of in the middle of that, I think. But also to note real quick is that alkalinity in this circumstance is not high alkalinity. It's actually a certain area of alkalinity, because if you go too high, it becomes very toxic for the body.
Yeah, and it's almost neutral, if I understand from what I've studied. It's like extremely close to neutral water, but it's alkaline.
But you could go to alkaline 10. I think once you start getting past 11 is where it starts becoming possibly toxic, I think. And the max is 14.
8 or 9. Just like doing a quick Google search, I just saw 8 or 9, which I didn't even know that high was good for us, but it said that store-bought can be up to 8 or 9.
Wow. Wild.
It's interesting. Very intriguing.
Good conversation, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is going really well. I think there's some powerful topics that have been presented today. I think one day...
Yeah, that bit about the frog was really interesting about, like I said, about the cryogenic. It's like, well, that explains it right there. I mean, ice is not normally in the human body. That's something very deadly to the human body.
Yeah, it's like little knives. Little cellular knives. That's why normally frostbitten parts, like, they don't come back. Like, they might let you keep it, but it's dead. Most of the time, they won't let you keep it either for gangrene and stuff. Pretty crazy stuff.
This is the necro room. I keep all my frostbitten limbs here.
So we're approaching about 5:30, and I always want to, I'm gonna try to anyway. Sorry, I'm a little stumbly on my words here but I'm gonna try to always have a little space towards the end for people to kind of let us know what they're up to and just really give the community a chance to interact with either some events or activities or like whatever it is you got. I want to hear it, and I want to hear it now. So, Joshua, what's going on in your future? What kind of events and stuff are you looking forward to? What's on your horizon?
I'm pretty excited about the Winter Solstice event coming up here in Phoenix, Arizona. If you're out here in Phoenix, Arizona and watching it, you should check that out. A Consciousness Rising. I personally am going to be doing a workshop there about self-policy, which is a political conversation about the self-policy. And there's going to be a lot of really other awesome people that are going to be facilitating there as well. So, that's what's coming up in my world. Other than that, I'm just focusing on my personal development and quest and constantly better myself every day and showing up for intriguing conversations like this to learn more.
Thank you for that. What about you, Jackie? You got anything cool coming up that maybe the community work would benefit from, or maybe just like some words of wisdom?
I'm also looking forward to Winter Solstice. It's a little bit different than some of the more holistic events I've been to, so I'm very curious to see what it's about. Plus, I know some pretty cool practitioners that are going to be there doing some pretty impressive things that I'm excited to see.
Awesome. In case you haven't heard of that Winter Solstice event, you can get tickets currently, I believe, through Higher Self Friendly. Joshua, maybe you can help me out on that. I'm pretty sure they have them on their website. Consciousnessrising.com?
Yeah, the Instagram page.
Or on their Instagram. Okay, thank you for that. But tickets are going quick, so you might want to hurry up. It's going to be awesome. Lots of, like she was saying, lots of really cool talent. Very alternative. I'm going to actually be facilitating there as doing some shamanic practice. If you want to find out more, please, again, check their Instagram. And let's see. Oh, they also every Monday at Lacuna Kava Bar, they same group of people. They rotate in between an astrology chat for all of you star seekers out there, and a conscious community conversation. And this is a great platform to kind of be heard by your peers, or maybe just kind of listen in, hear what's going on in your local community, so that way you can be a little bit more involved. Thanks again, everybody, for listening, especially you, those in my Clubhouse audience. I couldn't do this without you. You guys helped me carry this conversation and make it interesting, so thank you so much, Jackie and Joshua, for joining us today. Much Moonai. I will see you guys on Monday. Quick reminder, though, we are going to be changing the schedule a little bit, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Definitely, if you want to be up to date, subscribe to the calendar, which you can find either on Facebook or any of the other streaming places. Thanks again, guys. That's it for today. And